back and save him. Bitch, no, you can't. He murders children for fun. You could have told me the exact same thing in the first 40 pages of the story. Why are we over 120 pages in and you ain't get to the fucking point? I really love this book a lot. The sexual tension in here is unmatched, unlike anything I've ever read. I literally almost threw up in my mouth. When I tell you, I am praying for this man's downfall.
Hi everyone, it's Shar. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to a very exciting video. This is the biggest video project that I've taken on this channel. So as you know, 2023 was a fairly mediocre reading year for me. So for 2024, I wanted to start the year off by reading booktubers' favorites in the hopes that their 5 stars would also be my 5-star reads, and it would dramatically change my statistics for the 2024 reading year. This video was only supposed to be me reading 5 books, and by the end I read, I believe, 10 books for this video. Now this video is already long enough, as you can see, so I'm going to keep this intro brief. For this video I chose 10 creators, and there were 3 criteria that I was picking from. It was either a creator I watched a lot, so a personal favorite, a creator who had the most in common with me, or a creator who read the most similarly to me. Their top books of 2023 were books that I also loved, or were books that were already on my radar or already on my TBR. One of my goals for this video was to read the books that I owned. So while I did not own all of these books, many of these books were very easily accessible to me. So in no particular order, here are the creators that I featured in this video. So I'll pop the TBR for this video on the screen so that you could also see the creators who influenced my choices. This video was so much fun to film, even though it took me such a fucking long time to complete it. We had lots and lots of gems, some absolute favorites for the year already. So I'm just going to throw you back to the very beginning of January with the very first book for this video.
Hello darlings, it's time for the first update. But before I give you the update, I want to tell you what my intention is for this video. I know sometimes this can feel like a taste test, which I also love, but this is not a taste test. 2023 was a very mediocre year for me in terms of reading, and I really want to find some new favorites. So the point in me looking at my favorite creators' videos and picking a few books that I think I would enjoy is to also find another favorite. So I did start with Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone, which is a murder mystery set in Australia featuring a man who's somewhat estranged from his family due to the very interesting reason, which I won't tell you because it will be a spoiler, but essentially it's a family reunion, and this family reunion is hella fucking awkward for a lot of reasons until someone turns up dead, left trying to figure out who did this. But also, they have their own secrets and their own messiness going on. How do I say this? I don't like it. I don't like it. I'm so sorry. Listen, do I understand the humor? Sure. Is it a murder mystery? Absolutely. The reason I don't like this, I don't like family drama. I don't. Why did I pick up a book called Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone? Because I thought it'd be funny. It was supposed to be a funny book. I know it's a murder mystery, but the fact that they're all related annoys me. I don't care what your stepfather did. I don't care what your stepsister did. I don't care about your in-laws. I'm not saying that I won't enjoy it when I finish it or that my opinion can't change, just that my initial impression here at this 25-30% mark is not a pleasant one. And I want to fully emphasize that that's a me problem, not a this book problem. It's hitting all of the classic murder mystery tropes, and for me to call it a family drama is unfair. Like, what about the dead guy? Can we get back to the dead guy? Who is he? I am here to let you know that I completely changed my mind and I am loving this book. When I tell you about 1% later, so at the 21% mark, the book picked up and started flying like this. I think that the issue that I was experiencing was that the audiobook format with the way that the narrator is just speaking to you, because that's how the book is written, obviously, didn't work for me. And the reason why it didn't work for me is because when I read or I listen to an audiobook, I'm picturing the scenes as I'm reading them. them. So to have the narrator constantly like interrupt me and break the fourth wall didn't work for me in audiobook format, not because the audiobook isn't well produced, but because it felt like going to the movies and having someone lean over and constantly talk to you. When I switched over to just reading the ebook, I enjoyed this so much more. The humor popped so much more. I've laughed so many times. It's very tongue-in-cheek, and the action sequences are just going. And while I stick with my first stance of this is a family drama and the murder mystery aspects is really non-consequential in terms of who it was, you more so want to know who it is and why. It's very interesting. This is a mild spoiler here, so just be warned. But there's this whole aspect of, is it a serial killer, that I think is adding a lot of intrigue to the story. I'm really, really, really loving this book. In fact, I had to force myself to stop reading this book at 1 a.m. last night. I just kept saying, one more chapter, one more chapter, one more chapter. And then it was like 10 chapters later. So the speed has picked up. And if you were feeling like how I was feeling in the first 20% of the book, just give it some time, read a little bit more. I promise you it picks up like that. So I'm gonna finish this book and then we're gonna move on to the next book. Let us continue on. I'll see you with my final thoughts on Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. I'm here to let you know that I did in fact finish Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone, and I really liked it. I know at the beginning I wasn't enjoying it, but by the end, I loved how this turned out. I really enjoyed the humor of this, and I really liked how all of the characters like were involved. I know I said I don't like family drama, and traditionally I don't, but like the overarching mystery was really enjoyable, even though I thought that the reveal, it got me. It did get me, because I was like, what? It was a little ridiculous. But overall, I'm giving this book 4.5 stars, and I'm really glad it's one of the first ones that I read in 2024, so it was an absolute win for me. I meant to update you about this a little bit earlier. I decided to start What the Hex because it's a library book and I have to give it back like tomorrow, literally ASAP. So I read a lot of it. I kept meaning to update you, but I didn't, and I only have this much left. So let me give you my impressions. Conflicted. It's very conflicted because part of me likes the romance and like where it could go, but the other part of me gets an ick from the male character. It's a very confusing feeling for me because I'm like, I don't know. So let me tell you what this is about. So in this world, we have magic, right? And there are like witches or warlocks and familiars. Now, in magic, you typically think of a familiar as being like an animal companion of some kind, but in this world, it's not. A familiar is a being with a magical well that a witch or wizard can pull from. And in exchange, once this familiar has completed their apprenticeship, they are then able to use magic entirely on their own, have a very long and extended life, and get to essentially become a witch or a warlock. Our main female character here, what's her name? Penny? Yes, I can't believe I remembered that. Penny wants to be an apprentice. She wants to be a familiar to a wizard, but there's so many politics that go into whether or not someone can be a familiar. The waiting list is really long and she is not very high up on that list. So when some of her friends tell her, hey, we know this warlock who needs a familiar on the down low. Like, no one can know because technically it's not legal for him to practice magic. He's been forbidden from doing so, but he needs some help. And she's like, okay. So she signs up. And of course, this is our love interest, this guy here. He gave me an ick to start with because one of the very first things that he does is get really mad about something, throw his phone at the wall, and then when he meets our main female character, like insults her and tells her, you're gonna dress how I want you to dress, and like this is how it's gonna work. So I couldn't get over the fact that he was kind of an asshole. And to be honest with you, it triggered the part of me that stopped liking Grumpy Sunshine romances, specifically because sometimes Grumpy Sunshine dynamics is just one of the characters being an absolute dick to the other one. And I don't like that. I don't find that romantic. I have a 0-strike policy. I can't help that that comes up for me in romances because it just gives me an ick. He eventually settles down. But here's another thing that gives me an ick. Whenever Penny speaks, she literally spells out whatever she's saying. So let me just try to find an example of you just to show you. Right here, where can you see it? I don't even know. This is backwards. Right here. OMG. The character does that a lot. She says, OMG, WTF. Is there anything wrong with that? No. What gives me the ick is that the author is freaking spelling it out phonetically. I know what the letters OMG mean. You don't need to say OHEMGEE. The WTF one, I literally almost threw up in my mouth. I couldn't. It really just like gave me an ick. And here's another thing that gave me an ick. Our main female character has a pet squirrel. Why? Because she found the pet squirrel when it was like a little baby squirrel and she nursed it back to health. And rather than releasing the squirrel back into like nature, she keeps it and she locks it in a cage and she feeds it questionable food sometime. Like at one point, our main male character drops a bunch of cookies and then steps on them accidentally and it leaves like crumbs everywhere. He's like, oh my gosh, let me go sweep that up. And she's like, don't worry about it. The squirrel will eat it. I don't know. My feelings about this book aren't positive. Perhaps my expectations were too high. I'm supposed to believe in the romance, but I don't. I believe that she likes him, but I believe her reasons for liking him have to do more with the life that she envisions for herself rather than anything he's actually done for her, aside from giving her cookies and lots of orgasms because of how her magic well works. Literally her magic well, not anything else. I don't see myself giving this anything higher than 3.5 stars, but I am gonna finish this. The author is definitely trying her best to get me to believe that they are in love and they're a beautiful romantic couple. I just don't. I think that he won't be able to tolerate her for more than a few years, and I think that she should raise her standards. I'm here for the dragon shifters and the aliens and the gods. I'm not here for basic human man with some magic. Bar's too low. It's too low. Sorry. I'm aware that I look crazy. And you know what? I don't have the energy to care. I'm so fucking exhausted. I have no idea why. But besties, I'm here a few minutes before I have to jump on a meeting, but I figured I would give you the update for what the hex. I did finish this book a couple of days ago and I'm ultimately giving it 4 stars, which is so much higher than I thought. I thought it was gonna make a 3-star book, but I'm gonna give it 4 stars. And the reason that is I think that the first half of this book was fine. I didn't hate it. There was a lot of work to be done to get me to believe in this couple. But by the second half, it was much stronger. You felt more fully immersed in the magical like world that we were in the conflict. I love that it wasn't a 3rd act breakup, and it was a really enjoyable time in the end. It gets much spicier. Something that I didn't mention in my initial update for this book is how much I really enjoyed the magic system. There was some darkness in here and I was into that. It wasn't like they were just born with magical powers. Sure, they had magical powers, but a lot of this had to do with communing with the gods, with having the right sacrifices. It was like it felt like a very dark magic system, which I love. I love a little bit of darkness. This was still a really fun time and I would recommend it if you enjoy this kind of magical story, especially if you really enjoy Grumpy Sunshine. The male love interest is a bit of a douche to start with, but just give him some time. I promise he gets better and I promise he drops the douchiness pretty quickly. Let's talk about Bright Young Women. I started listening to Bright Young Women on Spotify because I have Spotify Premium, so you get like 15 hours of free listening. I have some hesitations and reservations about this. I know I picked it, but I picked it because of hype and how much people have loved it and what it has to say about true crime. And I really just wanted to experience that for myself, but I'm not a true crime girly. I've never been into true crime. It just really gives me anxiety and makes me sad. So me reading a book about true crime feels like it's not set up for success for me. I picked this up anyway because there is deeper conversations to be had and I am really enjoying the audiobook of it. And what I will tell you is this book is very, very hard hitting. If you don't know what Bright Young Woman is about, it is a story of a woman who survived a serial killer. Her sorority in Florida was attacked by a serial killer, killing some of her closest friends and permanently changing the lives of herself and everyone else in that home. And she's talking about the obsession with serial killers and almost idolization of serial killers and the realities of being the victim of that and how these women were impacted by this and how they're real people, really changing the narrative from focusing on the serial killer and their horrific discussing actions to the victims, the people who are related to these victims and how their lives are forever changed. I will not name the serial killer this book is based on, but just this book is so hard hitting and so sad. It's an immersive experience. The author is telling you a story and they're telling you that story very well, developing these characters really well. I think on like chapter 11 or something like that. And when I tell you, I literally sobbed. Like, I'm not crying, but like listen to this and like sobbed out loud because it's so heartbreaking and devastating. So far, I am really enjoying it and the conversations that are being had, not even explicitly about true crime at this point, but just how they're naturally being woven into the story that's being told and how there's nuance in that perspective of not just true crime is bad, but more exploring all of the layers and nuances within this genre.
I wasn't even going to update you at this point, but I'm going to update you because I am officially over halfway through Bright Young Women. I only have like an hour and a half left of the audiobook, which is perfect timing because the live show for Gabby's book club is tomorrow for Bright Young Women. But the reason I'm updating you is I think I mentioned in a previous clip, absolutely devastated by the realization of who Ruth is. Beyond the fact that this book is just like deeply emotional, very sad because of the situation that we're discussing. These are the victims of a serial killer and talking about the way that the people who love them most were impacted by their death and them dealing with this serial killer situation. Objectively, I think this book would have a higher rating for me, but I think that I'm not enjoying it as much as I could. For example, each time I put it down, I don't really feel any like desire to pick the book back up beyond the looming deadline of the book club live show is tomorrow. And while I am definitely enjoying it, I'm having questions about if the author is really accomplishing what she set out to accomplish and having some general feelings about the multiple timelines that we're following because they're a little bit hard to follow at times. Ruth's timeline is like very easy to follow mentally, and to me her story feels very fully developed. But then we have Pamela's storyline in the past when this event first happened, and a lot of that is just the investigation of the serial killer that this story is about and how they came to like find the serial killer and all of the victims of this serial killer and the ways that the justice system did not deliver justice. But I do really applaud the author for choosing to write a story that centers the victims, even if I have opinions about the blend of fiction and reality in this story. I'm not sure if that's working for me 100%. It's a little bit hard for me to follow the story beyond what's happening with them like trying to find this killer and prove that he was the killer. But I do find Ruth's story really, really fascinating, and I'm excited to learn more about her life, but also devastated because again, I know who Ruth is by this point in the story. There's a third timeline. That's what I wanted to say. And the third timeline is like present day. Could I tell you what's happening in this third timeline? Nope. It's a timeline we rarely ever see, and I truly have no idea what's happening, but I'm assuming that its purpose and its function is to tie up the story at the end of the book. But I'm going to see you when I finish Bright Young Women, and I'll give you my full and final thoughts at that point. I have officially finished Bright Young Women, and I think I'm in a space where I can give you a more cohesive review, and we can go over my thoughts and feelings about this book a little bit more in depth. Ultimately, I'm giving this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, and even though admittedly this is not a book I would have gravitated towards, it's not a genre that I typically read from, and truthfully, had it not been for this video and had it not been for the fact that this is a BookTube book club pick, I would not have read this book. But in the end, I'm very glad that I did read it, admitting, as I've said before, I have no knowledge of this case whatsoever. But I think that when it comes to this story, which is about 50% fiction and 50% like word for word exactly what happened, there definitely can bring up feelings of discomfort. And I think that's what I was alluding to in a previous clip, is that
Parts of this did make me feel uncomfortable, particularly where the author was kind of filling in spaces where they could not have known what happened. I think I'm referencing here Ruth's point of view. While I did really love Ruth's point of view, understand the purpose that she played in this story with what the author was trying to do and communicate in regards to centering the victims when having conversations about true crime and people who were actually affected by the actions of these horrific people. Ruth was still a fictional person, and her story was still fictional. So she's a fictional victim of this serial killer, and I think that could lead to a lot of ethical ambiguity. So I do want to be very forthcoming about that and say I recognize that, and it's something that I did feel, and I think I had to grapple with throughout the story, regardless of how much I loved Ruth and how much her story broke my heart. I definitely enjoyed what the author had to say about true crime and the way these cases are kind of sensationalized, and all of the spotlight that's put on the serial killers. The way that the author critiques that pretty seamlessly throughout the story, I think, is very well done. She at no point is criticizing people for enjoying true crime, but she definitely has critiques of true crime, which brings me to a critique that she had about how this case was handled that I did really enjoy. And it's that the conversations that are had about this man and the way he was portrayed in media to be like this charming, handsome, cunning, incredibly intelligent man, when in reality that wasn't the truth. And the author repeatedly states through Pamela, her main character in the story, that he wasn't. He was a really mediocre man. At some point she describes him as an incel who was caught picking his nose in the courtrooms, and that he obviously had no idea what he was doing when it came to legal cases. The way media portrayed him came from descriptions of law enforcement officials as well, and that one of the quotes that the author put in this book that I really enjoyed and I thought was very poignant and spoke to a lot of things was, they would rather portray him as this cunning, brilliant man instead of own up to all of the ways they fucked up this case. Repeatedly. They would rather say he was hard to catch, he was very cunning, when that just wasn't the truth. They were just extremely incompetent. And the author speaks to that in so many ways. I really enjoyed all those aspects of the story. Parts of it did make me uncomfortable, and there definitely is a conversation to be had about who gets to tell these stories and intention. It still leads to the question of critiquing true crime while also writing a true crime story. And having conversations about this, I also want to say that I realized this book was categorized as mystery thriller by Goodreads, and if you go in with those expectations, that's not what that is. This is a historical fiction, crime fiction, or literary fiction. Certainly not a mystery or thriller. There's so much that I could say about this book, and I could literally be half of this video, me talking about it, but I think I'm gonna leave it there. Even if it is traditionally not something I would have picked up, I still appreciated what was said. So I'm gonna move on to my next book, and of course I'll see you with my next update. Let's talk about The Right Move by Liz Tomford. I've always heard it pronounced Liz Tomford until I listened to the audiobook for this, and I realized the author's name is pronounced Liz Tomfordy. I don't know if that's true, but that's what the narrator said. And let me tell you, the audiobook is the way to go for this book, because I started listening to this morning just while I was cross-stitching, and I was like, it's gonna be fine, whatever. And then the male narrator started speaking, and I was like, good Lord, this man, nice voice for this character. So The Right Move by Liz Tomfordy, I'm gonna say Liz Tomford, but I think it's Liz Tomfordy, is a story of a man who is an elite basketball player, top of his game, rising talent, a millionaire, perhaps a billionaire, I don't know. This man has hella money. I know this because he likes to use that money on our main character. He is just living his life, trying to stay on his own, right? He's a very lone wolf, and his twin sister insists that he takes in his twin sister's best friend, who's going through a really hard time right now because her boyfriend of 6 years and best friend of 21 years
was cheating on her and took everything from her, and she has nowhere to go. So he agrees and they become roommates. And of course, a whole bunch of situations come in. It's their romance. You learn how they fall in love. And let me tell you, this is so good. The way I could not stop listening. The way I couldn't stop listening. The sexual tension in here is unmatched, unlike anything I've ever read. My God, by the time these two even kiss, you're like, finally. Because the way this author does sexual tension is just amazing. Like, you really are in there with the characters. Like, please just kiss for the love of everything. Holy, I don't even have thoughts. It's just good. It's just really good. I'm loving like the layers to the conversation, because it's not just them like being cute and having banter. They both have their own issues that they're helping each other with. There's like a fake dating trope that's involved in here somehow, and let me just, it's so good. I don't know how else to convince you. It's so good. But what I will say about the audiobook is that in his point of view, I love his voice, because it's a male narrator narrating him, and his voice just works really well for this character. But then in her point of view, she does a voice for him, and it's a female narrator. But the voice that she does for him has a really bad accent, like a really bad accent. I think it's supposed to be the Chicago accent, but when I tell you, it sounds like one of those accents from like The Godfather or something. I don't even know. It's like very reedy, very high pitched, a very bizarre accent that I don't think is true to the Chicago accent at all. And why it's so jarring is that in his point of view, he has no accent at all, which makes sense because obviously you don't hear your own accent, but his voice is so different in her point of view that sometimes it gives me an ick. Sometimes I have to actively pretend I'm not hearing it. But this book is good. And I can't wait to finish it, because let me just tell you, besties, I'm gonna listen to it all the way through. This pick, fantastic. Fantastic. And I'm not even a sports romance girly, but it is hitting all the things. Fake dating, grumpy sunshine. He is so possessive of her, but in like a very respectful way. He has no problem with her shining her light at all. He wants her to be exactly what she wants to be, and he's gonna help her do it because he's a millionaire. So there's a little bit of a spoil kink in here, and let me just, I can't keep saying it's so good. It's so good. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish that. Okay, I'm officially 50% of the way through The Right Move. And when I tell you, this book, the sexual tension is immaculate. And what I don't think I mentioned when I first updated you about The Right Move is that our main female character is a romance reader, and she like occasionally breaks the fourth wall, but like very gently, which I think is so much fun, because she'll be like, oh, he's book boyfriend material, or they'll have like joking scenes as part of their banter. One was like, can you darken your eyes? Can you growl? And he's like, what the fuck? And I love that she does that. And one of the very first things that she tells him when he's like, oh, you're so such and such, she's like, yeah, I'm exactly like other girls. And I love that, because I think a lot of readers are sick of the I'm not like other girls thing. That's not our main character at all. They haven't even gotten together, and I'm just like, please get together. So having a good time with that. I'm 50% of the way through. I don't think I'll update you again until I'm 75% of the way through. And the only like somewhat negative, not really, but somewhat negative feeling that I'm having is that this feels a little bit too long. Like, I'm loving being with them, but I am starting to get the feelings of, okay, we need to speed it up. Like, we need to stop dragging certain things out. But it's such a minimal feeling, but do want to bring up that yes, I am feeling that it's slightly too long. But that said, I'm gonna jump on my meeting, and I'll see you with whatever updates I have next. I have finished The Right Move by Liz Tomforty. I'm gonna keep saying that because that's how they pronounce it in the audiobook multiple times, so I'm assuming that is the correct way to pronounce the author's name. Have you ever read a book that you loved so much that you literally don't have any thoughts? That's me. I have no thoughts, I have no opinions. I loved it. I thought it was really great. I believe it was nominated for the Goodreads Choice Award, which honestly, I can see why. I said this in an earlier clip, but I 100% recommend that you listen to the audiobook for it. Even if the male narrator's female impression is a little odd, and even if the female narrator's male impression is a little bit annoying, individually, they're both really great narrators. This book is so good. A romance reader, and It's just so good. And oh my God, I was not expecting this book to be as hot as it was. Like, some books have a lot of sex scenes in it. This book had very intentional sex scenes in it, and the sex scenes themselves were just hot, like incredibly hot. I loved it so much, and I can only tell you, read this book. This definitely would have been on my best romances of 2023 list had I read it in 2023, but I'm so glad that this video allowed me to read it and encouraged me to pick it up, because quite honestly, I don't think I would have otherwise. So I'm very excited that I love this book, that it was a 5-star. We have had win after win after win after win, so we're gonna move on to the next books that I'm reading, which, to be honest with you, my brain's a little bit scrambled about like what I'm reading for what. So whatever that next book is, I'm gonna see you with it. This is a sci-fi apocalypse story. So in this world, almost 200 years ago, the Earth had gotten to a point where it could no longer sustain any human life. So humans had to leave, and all of the billionaires in the world get together and they build this massive spaceship that can take them to this faraway planet that will take 200 years to get to. You either can afford to go or you can't. And lots of people could not afford a ticket on this ship. So what they did was they said, we will let you come on this ship and you can live, but you will be an indentured servant, essentially. You will work for us and your children work for us for the next 200 years. It's slavery, but what they say is that. And when we get to this planet, everyone will be free. There will be no slavery, no indentured servitude, nothing like that. We are following our main female character, who is 50 years out from the arrival to this planet. She works for this family, taking care of this little baby named Charlotte, who she loves and adores with her whole heart. And unfortunately for her, her employers kill themselves, and she takes a baby and she runs. So we're following her as we figure out why she's running and how she's trying to like find this escape with this baby. And we're following the detective who is trying to track her down. All right, I have finished The World Gives Way, and I'm very happy to tell you that it was a solid 4-star read for me. I found the whole concept of an apocalypse taking place on a spaceship that replicated the entire world to be really interesting, but there were certainly some things that didn't work for me. For example, for most of the book, Tobias's point of view just annoyed me. I was like, ew. Because every time he would talk, he just sounded pathetic. Like, I'm so sorry to say that, but he did. He was obsessed with catching Mira for the only reason that he wanted to impress his dad. Nope, could not get on board. So every time I would hear his point of view in the audiobook, I was like, I don't care. Go away. I want to know more about Mira, because Mira is the interesting characters, and the characters in this book are very well developed and very fascinating. I couldn't picture the world super clearly. They kept saying the spaceship was like the size of the world, but the way that the characters moved through the world made me realize, no, it isn't. They could jump from city to city to city to city within the span of a couple of days. So I don't think it actually is the size of the world. What I started to picture, which I will admit took a lot of the serious tone out of this book for me, is the Sims 4 world maps. Even throughout it, it was supposed to be an action-packed story, and it didn't feel action-packed at all. Like, she's being hunted down by these, they call them security officials, but they're cops in this world, and it didn't feel super high tension, probably because Toby really annoyed me right until the very end. Also, some of the logic wasn't logicking for me. And I'm gonna spoil something here, so if you don't want to be spoiled, then you can just leave it at, I gave this book 4 stars, I had fun with it, and those are my reservations. And if you don't care about being spoiled, the logic didn't make any sense to me, because the world is ending because there's a crack in the hull, and they can't fix it. So once this crack widens, everyone's going to be sucked out and essentially instantly die. And that is what they're fighting against. But towards the end, Mira is trying to save Charlotte, the baby's life, because Charlotte comes from the wealthiest family on this ship. And if they have an escape plan, which she seems to believe that they do, there isn't. And she finds out that the escape plan was that they were all going to commit suicide via this drug that causes euphoria that doesn't, you don't even feel like you're dying. You just kind of are very euphoric and then it's the end of your life. And the reason why that was the escape plan is because there weren't any pods for them to like escape to. Keep in mind, the world spaceship that they were on had been going for almost 200 years, right? They were only 50 years away from their planet that they were going to go live on. I find it really hard to believe that the richest people in the fucking world would have built this giant ass spaceship that was an exact replica of Earth with its own weather system, ecosystems, deserts, underwater cities, but they couldn't figure out how to make a smaller version of that as an escape plan. They said it was technologically impossible, but it wasn't logically impossible to build an underwater city on a spaceship that was going to be going for 200 years. That wasn't technologically impossible. It felt manipulative and lazy, if I'm quite honest, because like I understood the buildup of the hopefulness of the story of like, oh, well, there'll be some kind of escape plan at least for the baby, but there wasn't. So you're just left with tragedy. I'm like, but there could have been. And also the whole premise that the people who are on this planet, they have indentured servants, people who essentially 200 years ago their ancestors sold them so that they could have life on this ship, and then everyone would be freed when they got to the planet. This spaceship is so fucking big that it has absolutely no issue whatsoever hosting everyone who lives on the spaceship, which is, it's the size of the world, as they keep telling us. So I don't understand why that happened, because there was obviously always space for everyone on the ship. Like, I understand why, because people shitty, but also like logically for me, I'm like, there was room for everybody. Literally, it's the size of the entire world. There was literally room for everybody. I'm glad that I read this. I'm glad that I picked it up. It certainly is not a new favorite, but I still really enjoyed it and gave it a solid 4-star read. But I would tell you, if you are expecting like lots and lots of things to happen, it doesn't. It's a lot slower than you think it is. So An Earl to Remember is an overboard retelling. And when I tell you, when I heard that name, it unlocked a core memory, because as a very young child, I'm talking under the age of 9, I really loved the movie Overboard. And if you don't know what it's about, it's relevant to the book, I promise. Overboard is a story of this very, very pretentious woman on a boat who really is like a terrible person to a lot of people, but she ends up in an accident and loses her memory. And no one is there to like take care of her or to say who she is, except for the guy that she messed with, her former employee who was a carpenter. And he decides that he is going to convince her that she's his wife and the mother of the 3 sons that he has, because he is a single father, just to get a bit of revenge. Earl to Remember is a retelling of this, but of course with the roles flipped. So he is an Earl who really has a reputation for being a rake. Just genuinely not necessarily a nice guy. Like, he has good intentions, but he doesn't treat people well all the time. Our main female character is a chef, and she gets the opportunity to cater one of his yacht parties, so she goes on board and she does that, except there's a series of miscommunications because he thinks that he's about to have a threesome, and she walks in to like deliver the food, but he's like, oh, you must be the other girl. Which one are you? And she's like, what? And they end up kissing, but his mistress walks in and she's like, how dare you, and essentially gets our main female character fired. And that's really bad for her because, one, it's unjust. They refuse to pay her wages, and she is trying to take care of her sisters. She has 3 sisters. She's trying to take care of them. It's really hard. So she leaves and she's very, very angry. Except that the Earl and his mistress also get into a fight, and the mistress accidentally throws him overboard. He hits his head, gets amnesia, and happens to wash up in the town that our main female character is from. He starts saying some nonsense. He's like, I know you. You've been in my bed. And she's like, I have not been in your fucking bed. But his only memory of her is the kiss that they shared. So she's like, you know what? I'm your wife, husband. Don't you remember me? And she puts him to work on his farm, and that is what this book is about. So I will see you with my final thoughts and opinions on this book. I finished In Earl to Remember. I really loved this book a lot. I love the relationship between the two characters. I loved her plot for vengeance against him and how she forced him to work. But I also really loved how he interacted with her family, took care of her, took care of her sisters, stood up for them. Like, it was so cute. He was definitely something, for sure. There were times where I was clutching my imaginary pearls because I was like, the way he talks about sex is so much more descriptive than anything I typically see in historical romances. Not that they aren't spicy or descriptive, it's just like how he describes it is different. For example, in historical romances, it's like her channel or whatever other thing they want to use to describe someone's vagina. He's just like, you're pussy and I'm gonna fuck you from the back. Do you want me to make love to you or do you want me to fuck you? And I'm like, scandalized. But I loved it. I'm so happy to say that it was a 5-star read for me. This was such a good pick. I don't have much else to say about it, except that I wish that it was longer because the ending was a true classic rom-com ending, but I would have wanted to see more of their happily ever after and how he came to that conclusion. I'm so happy I read this. I knew I was back in my historical romance era. I loved how strong our female character was. I love how funny our male character was. I love how much she was just like, you owe me money, and so I'm gonna put you to work. And it was just such a good time. So I'm gonna move on to the next book. I wish it was another historical romance, but it's not. I'm gonna be reading Out on a Limb. So I'll see you with my initial updates and impressions. I will acknowledge that I'm going to be really annoyed at myself for filming this with the window open, but here's my initial updates and impressions for Out on a Limb. For the first 3 or so chapters when our characters meet, I was just like grinning. It's like, oh, they're so cute. And I loved how they interacted with each other. They just like had great banter right off the bat. They really understood each other. And I love how the author was able to establish that in such a short amount of time. This book also starts with an author's note, which I thought was so helpful just to kind of listen to Hannah Bonham Young's story, why she wrote this book and what she was hoping to accomplish, and then jumping into the story itself. This is very much a book about pregnancy, right? So the whole idea is that these two people, one with a limb difference and one with a prosthetic leg, meet at a Halloween party. They have instant chemistry, great banter. They both are looking for something casual. They just had to go upstairs and to have a one-night stand. One-night stand results in baby, and they decide they're going to raise that baby together without entering a romantic relationship. So that is the story that we're in. What I find myself missing is Beau's point of view, because his life has also just been completely changed by the news that he's going to be a father, and for him, he never thought he would be able to have children. So it's like a miraculous thing for him, and I really want to see more of his perspective as he takes on the role of supportive father. I want to hear more of his thoughts and like his fears and his worries, because we're very much in Winnie's point of view. While I definitely am interested in the story, I can't say that I'm invested in the story, and by this point I'm about halfway through it. I'm listening to it, I'm interested in it, I don't feel invested, and that's because of the way time is moving throughout the story, because it's following the progression of her pregnancy. So we have the moment when they first meet, we have her when she's 6 weeks pregnant and just finding out that she's pregnant, and then we get to the point where she's 8 weeks pregnant or something like that, and she's telling Beau, then we get 10 weeks pregnant, and now we're at 15 weeks pregnant. So you're jumping time, and I feel like there are key moments here that I'm missing, and I don't know how the author would navigate this, but I almost wish we got shorter chunks of time, so like less frequent updates and more week 8, and then it was just a full exploration of what they were doing in week 8 and how they came to know each other and really getting more of that development of their relationship. I am really enjoying this book so far. I'm just not enjoying it as much as I want to enjoy it. I think that if I got Beau's point of view and if the time jumps were working for me a little bit more, this would be more of a solid book for me. But for now, I'm going to continue listening, and I'm going to see you with my next update. I officially finished Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young. It was fine. I gave it 3 stars. And I feel like I have such conflicting opinions about this book, because my feelings about the timeline not working for me did go away, because eventually it slowed down and it stopped feeling like this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. We got to see more of the in-between moments, which is what I was looking for. The way I visualized it in my mind was that the story was here, but as the reader, we only ever got to see from here. So there was all of this,
that we didn't get to see and just things that were briefly touched on. For example, I would have really loved to know more about Wynn's camp that she was developing. I would have wanted to know more about Beau himself and get his point of view, as I mentioned. We get their romance, but because we see their romance in scenes as opposed to seeing the complete overall development of their romance. And to me, that was such a shame because I absolutely loved some of the topics that we're exploring, especially with having two disabled main characters, but it just didn't work for me. And what I'm going to say is that this book has gotten a lot of hype, and if you think, oh, I'm going to love this book anyway, regardless of the fact that it has a pregnancy trope, and this book will not be the exception for you. It will not change your mind. But I mentioned that I have complicated feelings because I do feel like their romance was very sweet and I felt like their relationship was very healthy. We just didn't see enough of it. And I also loved Beau. Like, Beau was my very definition of dream man. And like, I love Beau so much, but Beau is not enough to make this story more than a 3.5 stars. So that's where I'm going to leave my rating for this. I did start Last Tale of the Flower Bride, which is a gothic story of a woman and a man who are married, and he absolutely adores his wife, but she gave him the condition that he cannot ask about her past. And of course, her past comes up throughout their marriage. It's very sinister. It's very enjoyable. I've just gotten to the part where we're getting introduced to some of the twists. That's around chapter 10. I was listening to the audiobook just because I've been crocheting and I like to have an audiobook to listen to while I do that. What I'll say is that I think I would enjoy the physical reading experience more, and I have the Fairy Loot edition of that book, so I'm going to go ahead and do that.
Hello, my darlings. Let's talk about The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Rashani Choksi. I am officially 100 pages in, a little bit over 100 pages. I'm happy to tell you I'm really enjoying it. Do I know what the fuck is happening? No, I don't. It's very dreamlike. It's very gothic. Is anything fantastical even happening? I don't know. It's very much giving dreamscape. It's giving gothic. It's giving whimsical. It's giving fairy tale. It's giving magical realism. Don't have a lot to tell you, but I did to tell you that I think I already know what happens, and it's not because I'm like some genius mastermind. I think Rashani Choksi is literally telling you what happened, and at this point, they're being so obvious about it. They're like, bitch, at this point, you should know what's happening. You should know what's happening. I've told you what's happening. I've heard this is about toxic friendships, but their friendship dynamics are very, very interesting to me. It's almost giving like female friendship with very homoerotic sapphic undertones. The point of view where we're hearing from some of the women in this story, for me, is stronger than the bridegroom. Not that there's anything wrong with his chapters, but the women's perspectives are like dream-like fairy tales with lots of darker undertones, especially for one of the women that we're hearing from. But the bridegroom's perspective is a mystery because he's like, what the fuck is my wife hiding from me, and how do I find out without pissing her off? I don't know where this is going to go, but I am really enjoying it. So far, one win of a pick. All right, so you already know my initial thoughts and impressions about Last Tale of the Flower Bride, but what I also want to say is that I realized the reason this book has such a dreamlike quality is because it is dreamlike, but also because the writing is, I hate to say it, purple prose. It is so overwritten that it's hard for you to hold on to the story and to understand what's happening. And I love like a dreamy vibe to a book if it's intentional, which in part it is intentional, but also the writing is just adding to that and making it confusing. So now it's less dreamy and more what's happening? Huh? Something happened in this book. And again, it's hard for me to do these reviews without spoiling, because for me to tell you how I feel about something without the context of why I feel that way is confusing. But we have Indigo and Azor, and this is the past point of view. So Indigo goes on like this 3-week tour type thing because she's hella rich and she's like gotta go to her heiress duties, right? And while Indigo goes away, Azor manages to catch the attention of this man named Limerick, who is her age. She's a teenager. They have like teenage love, and Indigo comes back and Azor's like, he likes me, and I want to be with him. And Indigo is unfucking well, and do you know what she did? She invited this man over, and then she proceeded to fuck him and invited over Azor so she could see that he didn't care who he was fucking. He just wanted to fuck anybody. And the reaction that I had was just like, and if you can believe, that's not the worst thing that Indigo does.
because Azor is in this really scary and traumatizing situation where her mother has married this man who is a pedophile. He is constantly hitting on Azor, constantly trying to get her alone. That is the home that she goes back to. But Indigo is so fucking unwell that she views this as kind of like a fairy tale. And she's more so amused by the situation than anything. She's like, it's a necessary evil. And there's this scene where Indigo forces Azor to dress up very, very well, despite the fact that she knows how uncomfortable Azor is in her home and the kind of situation that she's facing. And she gives Azor this nickname in relation to a fairy tale about this young girl who's being essayed by her father, her stepfather. I'm not rooting for Indigo at all. I think I know what happens, and as I mentioned in the previous clip, and I just really, really, really hope that Azor beats Indigo's ass. Like, for real, thoroughly, because Indigo is giving entitled rich girl playing with people like they're her toys.
So I have finished Last Tale of the Flower Bride, and I'm giving it 3.25 stars. This is disappointing for me because if you've been here for a while, you know that I put this on my most anticipated for 2023. I was so excited when I got a Fairy Loot edition of it, which, by the way, this is what it looks like. And I genuinely thought this was a 5-star prediction because I really enjoy gothic tales. I wish I had a more clear and solid explanation for why this story didn't fully work for me. I just felt lost. I felt lost in the story, but not in a good way. It was really hard for me to understand because it felt bogged down by a lot of descriptors that it didn't need. I love flowery writing. This is too much. And I've told you that I don't like Indigo. And of course, I knew from the very beginning exactly where this story was going to go. And besides Indigo being an unlikable character, I want to give you clear examples as to why Indigo is someone that I so deeply dislike. But also, Indigo does some really shitty things. And this is going to be a spoiler here. So again, if you don't want to be spoiled, feel free to just jump on to the final clip. I'm going to spoil something here to really demonstrate why I dislike Indigo. I've already told you about Azor's background and the kind of fear that she lives with on a daily basis because of her stepfather. When Azor decides that she doesn't want to live in the other world, she wants to live her life like a normal teenage girl. She wants to go out and explore the world and live life well. But Indigo does not like that. And Indigo goes over to Azor's house under the pretense of celebration with champagne. But she drugs the champagne, and Azor ends up passing out completely. And what does Indigo do while Azor is passed out? She strips her naked, puts her in a fur coat as a reference to the fairy tale I mentioned earlier, and then dumps her in her stepfather's bed. Then she hides behind the door. When Azor's stepfather comes home, Indigo lets him masturbate to Azor in the bed, and then takes pictures of it, and then insists that Azor looks at it, all to make sure she doesn't leave. Indigo was truly such a horrific person that it was difficult for me to enjoy this story for what it was. This could be described as fantasy. It's not. There's no magic in here. I don't even know what I would call this, but if anything, it's leaning a lot more on like literary fiction with a gothic tale. Maybe gothic fiction is where it would lean more. But also we have this tale of her husband, right? The bridegroom, as they call him throughout this story. And her husband's story is just really sad, like really tragic too. And in that way, they see each other and they love each other. So 3.25 stars is my rating for this book. Hello, my bangs, they look like this. We're gonna pretend that that's not happening. So I want to give you the update for the book that I'm reading now, which is Stolen by the Wolves. And when I tell you, I had to physically stop myself from finishing this book because I was going to finish it without giving you any updates. This is a Omegaverse Viking historical romance. I don't have the intelligence to know exactly the timeline. In this one, we have these 3 Viking brothers, and they are out and about conquering the land. And they're on a quest to get this kingdom because they believe that the woman who
have been blessed by, I'll put her name on the screen, who have been blessed by her are there, and they're desperately trying to find them. As I mentioned, this is Omegaverse. And in case you don't know what Omegaverse is, I'm not going to explain it to you. When I tell you, I'm loving this so much. It's such a fun read and exactly the break that I needed for some of the heavier books that I've been reading throughout this video. I stayed up till 1:30 in the morning last night reading this book, which was so exciting for me because I struggled through the first 35 pages of the story because it is a little bit over 300 pages, but in the first 35 pages and even beyond that, the characters do not know each other. They have not met, so you're very much following their independent stories. And this story starts off with an attack and then with an orgy. They are having an orgy under the full moon, and we get full details of that orgy. And like, listen, I love the fluidity of the sexuality of these characters, and while I do love me some steamy scenes, it was jarring to just jump into an orgy. But the orgy did have a purpose, and it was to show you kind of the running cycles. I don't know what you would call it. The men who are the wolves in these stories, under the full moon for a week or so, they essentially go into like this lustful haze where all they want to do is fight, kill, and fuck. And to make sure that they're not fighting and killing, they just fuck all night. And that's exactly what's happening. What was definitely a moment for me was the fact that our hero is fucking someone else in this orgy, and you're just getting that perspective. Obviously, he has not met the main character. Just like, huh? So I did struggle through that. But, it gets so good after that, and the world building of how the author does the Omegaverse for this, I think is so interesting and like fairly unique, or as unique as Omegaverse can get, which was a lot of fun to read. But I'm gonna warn you right now, this is a historical romance that's dark and very, very, very gritty. And there are some sensitive subjects in here that I would encourage you to be aware of because the kingdom that they're trying to break into is very, very religious. It's the early days of Christianity, and there's no diplomatic way for me to say this, but in the village that these women live in, their heat cycles is viewed as like a test of will, and it is the same for their men, and the women have to whip themselves, and this is very much, as the religion exists for them, it's this God hates women, and this God hates everyone, actually, and their only job is to repent by hurting themselves constantly and sacrificing people. Also, there's a really abusive piece of shit man in here, but you just want to, right? Ooh, it pisses me off. I get so mad just hearing about this man. Disgusting. When I tell you, I am praying for this man's downfall. He doesn't even deserve a merciful death, and I'm not apologizing for it. Piece of shit. I'm so fucking mad about this man. This story is dark. It is dark. And despite that, our actual hero of this story is such a soft and protective and sensitive person, even though he is such a powerful warlord. I'm absolutely loving it, but I do want to tell you, it's not romance heavy for the first book because this is a series. I believe it's a fairly long series, and this book is kind of reading more like the setup to the story and as it will develop throughout the rest of the series. Like, our main characters, the actual love interests of this story, do not actually meet until almost halfway through, and then their interactions are very like sporadic, even though there definitely are filled with passion and tension. They're sporadic, and there's just a lot of things that I'm really enjoying about this story, and I'm happy to say it is a win of a pick. I would not widely recommend this to everyone because of some of the darker subjects within this story. I am really loving it. I am gonna finish it within the next 15 minutes or so I wanted to make sure I gave you that up.
I have officially finished Stolen by the Wolves. All of my thoughts and feelings still stand. I'm ending up at a 4-star because while I thought this book was very romantic, the romance was not really the strongest point in the story, by which I mean it was not the point of the story. It was there and it was important, but this book, as I've mentioned in the previous clip, is more of a setup for the upcoming books. For reference, this book was a little bit over 300 pages, and I think the next book is something like almost 700 pages, so we're really getting into it. I absolutely love the writing style in here. I really enjoyed the world
world building and how unique this Omegaverse felt. I also loved our hero so much because he's so protective. He's so like considerate and sensitive and protective, but he's a warlord, and like that's undeniable. And while I do think you could have very, very valid criticisms of this book, and I 100%, as I've already said, think you need to check the trigger warning, I enjoyed this book for what it was. I will definitely be continuing with the series.
Now we get to move on to the final book in this video, which I've been filming this video for almost 2 months now, so I'm very excited to finish this. I will finally be reading One Dark Window, and I'm so glad to get to this. I put this on previous TBRs. I haven't gotten to it because, as you all know, I really struggle with reading my special edition books. I don't know why, I do. But this is going to be a really exciting read. It's about this girl who falls prey to like a fever, and she gets a disease that essentially gives her, people think it's magic, but for her it's just like a voice in her head that she calls the nightmare, and they go on some kind of quest. Everyone I've seen talk about this book has absolutely loved it. I may be questioning why I'm picking such a long fantasy to end this video with, but I'm still excited to get to it. I'm going to see you with my first impressions. I am 100% aware of what I look like right now, and you know what? I don't fucking care. I'm here to tell you that I am part of the way through One Dark Window. A little bit over 100 pages into this. In fact, I think I'm quite a bit over 100 pages. I'm at page 120 in this story, and we're having pacing issues. We are having pacing issues because why the fuck am I this much into the book and we still have not gotten to the plot? If we were doing world building, fine. And I know people love to say that this is gothic, but one of the key elements to gothic fiction, which I love and I really feel is important, is atmosphere. What this book doesn't have? Atmosphere. Instead, we spent 118 pages. I'm sure even more than that, because we still haven't gotten to the fucking plot. We're still in paragraph 1 of premise. Instead, we're talking about her cousin. I don't care about her cousin. I really don't. And here's why. Homegirl's a plot device. Like, why did we spend so many fucking pages talking about this bullshit? Quite honestly, we could have had the very first scene where she meets the huntsman in the woods, right? And then she's like, I know who you are, and he just takes her and explains everything. Instead, we're at this castle with the equinox ball, which has absolutely nothing to do with anything except to set up the cousin. You could have told me the exact same thing in the first 40 pages of the story. I'm trying to be as honest as possible about like what I'm feeling and why I'm feeling this way, and it would be fine if it felt gothic. It doesn't. It's just the cousin running around being a fucking idiot. I can save him. Bitch, no you can't. He murders children for fun. You cannot save him. Like, be quiet. Anyway, despite my harshness and my harsh critique of the first 100 and so pages, I do think I'm going to enjoy this once we get to the point. I finished One Dark Window. No, this is not a new edition. I just reversed the dust jacket. I'm so excited to tell you that I loved it. I knew that I would. Despite the reservations that I had and criticisms of the first 20-30% of this story, I knew I would love where this would go. The magic in here was really, really interesting, and I kind of loved this whole setup that was going on in this world and the things that they were fighting for. It's not without its critiques, but before I get into those, I want to tell you it was a solid 4-star read for me. Ooh, that's shiny. And I cannot wait to get to book 2, which I believe is called Two Twisted Crowns. Now, here's why it's not a 5-star for me. As I mentioned, I think we had some basic issues in the beginning. I didn't personally believe the relationship between Raven and Elspeth. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Like, the author kept trying to convince me that they had chemistry and that they really saw each other. I was like, are you sure? Are you sure? Because I'm not feeling that through the pages. I saw someone say that the magic system in here is very, very unique, and I want you to take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt, but no, it isn't. Not to say that it isn't interesting and it doesn't have its own nuances within this story, but from the very first time that I started reading this book, I was like, you know what this reminds me of? Yu-Gi-Oh! And if you've watched Yu-Gi-Oh! And you've read this book, are you gonna look at me and tell me that I'm wrong? because I'm not. It reminded me of Yu-Gi-Oh! Besties, but still very interesting and adult view on it, and not 100% right. Like, I'm not saying everything, just the way the magical cards work and some of the possession elements in here. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that also happens in Yu-Gi-Oh! Beyond that, I really enjoy the characters in here, and I really wish we got more exploration of Elspeth's father, because I think that his story was really interesting, and I almost would like a prequel with him. And the final reason why this isn't a 5-star for me is that I love the Nightmare. I do. I think he's funny. I think he's a very complex character. The Nightmare does this thing where he speaks in rhyme, but then he also speaks normally. And I'm like, for me, it's one or the other. Because to have someone break out into essentially a poem every other fucking sentence in your head, annoying. Which I think was the point. But as a reader, I was like, God damn. If this thing does not stop rhyming at me, I don't want to feel like I'm reading Dr. Seuss. Like, stop it. But anyway, solid 4-star pick for me. That was the final book in this video. Apologies that it's so shiny, but like, look at how beautiful this cover is. This is one of the most ambitious video projects I've ever taken on, and I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to every single one of the creators I featured in this video. I have all of their channels linked down below. There were so many creators that I also wanted to feature in this video, but at some point I had to stop. But I kept going and got to 10, and I was like, listen, I just can't feature everyone who I love and adore in this community, because this video would be 8,000 hours long and I would be reading 100 books. Like, that would be ridiculous. But as always, I hope that you enjoyed it. Let me know if you read any of these books, or if you now plan to pick up some of these books. I'm glad to have found some of my personal favorites throughout this video. Thank you for being with me throughout the entirety of this hour-long video, and I'm going to catch you in my next one. Bye!